Hello, welcome to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mail. We got Sports 25 to life, and we're talking about tonight's slate. It's an interesting one because Chris Sale usually just such a lock for your cash games, but gets the toughest matchup on the board by far against the team that crushes left-handed pitching in the Toronto Blue Jays. It's at U.S. Cellular, so obviously out of their friendly confines of the Rogers Center, and that's not to say that Chris Sale isn't a guy in play. You're going to love him in GPPs, but at $12,700 in this matchup, really tough to pay for him in cash games tonight. I think that my guy I'll be playing more often than not is going to be Carlos Carrasco, $10,200. Gets Houston. We know strikes out a ton. He's been pretty consistent all season, coming off one of his best starts of his career. 13 Ks, came within a strike of getting a no-hitter in that one. So $2,500 less. I think he's a safer cash game option tonight.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, the matchup is just significantly better is the big thing. I mean, it's going to be tough not to play Sale with the way he's been pitching. I mean, just so many strikeouts lately. And the Blue Jays strike out quite a bit, despite the fact that they can put a ton of runs on the board. So, I mean, there's a lot to like there. I mean, right now I have Sale projected for 9.9 strikeouts. And, I mean, I don't have anyone else within 2 strikeouts of that projection-wise. So, I mean, there's just a ton of upside there. He's still a small favorite. I mean, the over-under on that game is 7.5, I want to say. Is that right?
Yeah.
He's minus 126. I mean, I still like Sale a ton. Obviously, the price is going to be the big thing there. Yeah. With a somewhat short slate, I feel like it's going to come down to what I want to pay for in terms of hitters. So I'm going to try and play Sale as much as I can still, even though I like a couple of these other guys. But I think Sale's going to be my number one target, even with the tough matchup.
Yeah, I mean, he's still definitely the best pitcher on the board. A couple other options: Dallas Keuchel against the Indians. He's been just incredibly consistent, that huge ground ball rate. He's been pitching deep into games. Got to like that. AJ Burnett gets that really awful San Diego Padres offense right now. He's another guy who hasn't been great very often, but he's been very good most times. You know what you're getting out of him. He's got a nice, safe floor. And then a guy that a lot of people are going to be looking at as well is Chris Heston, facing off against the Mets. Obviously, same team that he pitched his no-hitter against not too long ago, but he's also been fairly inconsistent, struggles with lefties. So 6,300, I think that there's more reward than risk there, but not a guy that I'm just going out of my way to play tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with the risk, I mean, he's going to be one of my favorite GPP plays, I think, just because the upside is there.
Yep.
I mean, that's the way I like to go in GPPs as much as I can with pitchers, because it's really hard to win a GPP or even finish at the top of a GPP without having a ton of upside. I mean, you can throw cash game pitchers in GPPs and like cash in them. Obviously, that's no problem, especially if there's overlay and stuff like that. I don't mind throwing cash game pitchers in GPPs, but if you're going out there and basically just trying to get a win, especially on DraftKings with a GPP pitcher, I mean, it's kind of a waste of a lineup for the most part. If the guy can't strike out 7-8 guys at the least or go 7-8 innings, I mean, you're going to need just absolutely massive performances from all your batters, and that's much tougher to do than mix your pitchers with a bunch of GPP options and end up with some really big totals there.
Yeah, completely agree with you there. As we move over here to catcher, Buster Posey gets a lefty at home. Gotta love him. He's been hitting the ball really well, 4,500. Same thing for Jonathan Lucroy. It's a righty-righty matchup, but you got to like how well he's been hitting the ball since his return as well. He's 4K. And then, fresh off his day off, Matt Wieters gets fly ball pitcher in Phil Hughes tonight, so I'm a big fan of his tonight as well.
Yeah, I like Phil Hughes a decent amount. I mean, I think as far as cash games go, I'm going to be sticking to probably Burnett for the most part. I mean, San Diego just hasn't been good against righties. The weather concerns me there a little bit, but honestly, there's a lot of weather concerns today. San Diego, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Washington, and Kansas City, Tampa Bay. All 3 of those games are tough in terms of weather tonight. So, I mean, that's going to be a lot of the tough part with pitchers, because if we're seeing a lot of rain in that Pittsburgh area, it's hard to throw Burnett even with that great matchup, because if he comes out after a delay of 4 or 5 innings or something like that, I mean, you're spending a ton of money for a guy that just isn't going to score many points. So the weather's a big factor today in terms of pitchers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you need cheap guys at catcher tonight, there's really not a whole lot to see. I was searching for someone. Normally you get a guy like Miguel Montero against a righty, but he's not going to be playing tonight. David Ross is going to be catching.
Yeah.
John Lester, as he always does. So really, with that being said, I mean, you're paying up for catcher tonight more often than not. I mean, Posey and Lucroy definitely your top options.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to go away from Posey right now for me. He's basically been in every lineup I can afford him in for the most part. And facing a lefty today, I mean, you really just have a hard time going away from him. The other guy I'm going to look at is Grandal, assuming he's in the lineup. He sat out yesterday, I assume just because it was a day game after a night game. So I would think he'd be in the lineup today. I mean, we've seen how bad O'Sullivan's been at times this year. I think basically all Dodgers lefties are in play today as really strong plays.
Yeah, definitely. First base options, there's quite a few again. I like Anthony Rizzo against John Lackey, 4,500. He's an interesting option. Of course, Adam Lynn has been crushing righties, 4,500. Great option there as well. Adrian Gonzalez, if he's in the lineup, we know O'Sullivan, like you said, terrible against lefties. He did get hit in the hand by a pitch. He should be in the lineup, it seems like, but keep your eye on that and see. And then your ultimate tournament option is your most pricey guy here, and that's Jose Abreu. Starting to heat up. You get to lefty and Mark Burley, but 5,400, definitely going to reserve him for GPPs only tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I think Rizzo is probably the best overall play. Adrian Gonzalez, another lefty for the Dodgers that I like. I know he's been dealing with a bruised right hand, and he's questionable for today, so it'll be interesting to see if he's in the lineup. Not a ton else I really like at first base today. I don't mind Chris Davis against Phil Hughes, although Hughes has looked decent lately. I'll play Davis a decent amount in GPPs at 4,000. That's a really hard number to argue with against what's a really fairly average righty, even though he's been a little bit better lately for Hughes. Like I said, I'm probably going to play Hughes a little bit, so obviously I have to mix and match there and make sure they're not going against each other. But, I mean, Davis has massive upside for 4,000. I mean, you're not really going to get that from anyone else on DraftKings today.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's two cheap guys I'm looking at. Victor Martinez, still only $3,600 against Iwakuma, making his first start off the DL. And then Lucas Duda, $3,300 against Chris Heston, who struggles against lefties. He's a fine punt if you're going to go cheap. Second base options, Brian Dozier gets a lefty. A pretty good lefty in Wei-Yin Chen, but I'm certainly playing Dozier as much as I can tonight at 4,500. You got to love him. Some other options there. Neil Walker, been hitting the ball pretty well. He gets James Shields tonight. $4,100 for him, not a bad price. And then if you're looking for cheap guys, I mean, once again, Cesar Hernandez just continues to produce. I mean, he's getting steals, he's getting hits, multi-hit games, and I believe 6 of his last 9 games. So $3,100 for him. Second base shortstop eligibility, I like him as well. Yeah,
that's a good one. Joe Panic is in a lefty matchup today, but he hasn't been terrible against lefties. He's only 3,400. We mentioned how much we like Posey behind him. I think he's a fine play despite that lefty-lefty matchup. I think he's probably more of a GPP play, but he's going to be super low owned at 3,400, and I think that's a good price for him. Danny Espinosa is another value guy I look at. He's 3,000 with some power against DeScalfani. He's been hitting second in the order against righties, so I think he's in a good spot. Outside of that, no one's super cheap that I like today.
No,
I mean, you could look at Wilmer Flores at 2,900 against Heston, but I mean, Flores is a guy I play for power, and Heston does a pretty good job of keeping the ball on the ground, so I'm not super excited about that play.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Moving over to third base, Josh Donaldson, your most expensive option against the lefty, but I'm not playing him against Chris Sale. You go ahead and do that in tournaments if you like. I'm not playing anyone against him. Chris Bryant, probably my favorite play here. If I'm paying up, 4,500 against Lackey. He's hitting the ball really well recently. Had that big double dong game a couple days ago. Stolen 2 bases in his last 3 as well. 4,500 against Lackey, who's not going to overpower anyone. He doesn't have great stuff. He doesn't have elite stuff. He's a good pitcher, not a great one, though. I like that matchup for Davis quite a bit. And then another interesting one, who's going to be probably your most popular play at third base. Manny Machado is only $3,900 at Minnesota against Phil Hughes. I mean, if not him, your nice swerve is the other side of that one, and Trevor Plouffe, who hits lefties really well, same price.
Yep, I like Plouffe also. I'm playing him and Dozier as much as I can against lefties, especially in GPPs. They both have a ton of upside right now. And those are the 2 guys you play in that lineup. I don't really play anybody else. I mean, Joe Mauer is right in between them, and he has basically no power right now. And I think he had one of his better games of the season with 2 doubles the other day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's about his upside at this point. So, like, I'm not really ever stacking the Twins, but anytime they face a lefty, if you can get those 2 guys in your lineup, you should be in really good shape.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I mean, I think you covered most of the guys I really like today. I like Kyle Seager more on FanDuel. 4,100 on DraftKings is just too much for me, even against a pretty weak righty in Simon. There's one other guy I had on here. I think it must have been a really cheap guy. Let me look really quick and see who I had. I don't know how to say his first name. Joaquin Arias. Is that how you say his first name?
Yeah.
I think it is. Okay.
It's about as good as I would have done. So.
Yeah, he's been playing against lefties for San Francisco at either third base or shortstop quite a bit lately, and he's absolute minimum on DraftKings. I think he hit 6th and started at second base the other day against a lefty. I would think he's probably 6-7 in the same kind of spot. He's hit 8 a couple times, so depending on where he's at in the lineup, I think he can be a decent value play if you're trying to play 2 top pitchers on DraftKings. Obviously, I don't like playing guys that low in the lineup a ton, but you don't find very many guys that aren't hitting 9th and are totally terrible at 2,000 on DraftKings very often. So I usually just like to point those ones out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Help you get some big pitchers like you mentioned. Shortstop, I love in tournaments playing Carlos Correa. Like I said, I'm playing Carrasco probably in cash games. I like him a lot. But Correa hitting the ball so hard right now.
Yep.
Got to love him if you're not on Carrasco. Outside of that, I don't love the prices for really anyone here. I like Brandon Crawford, who's actually really good in lefty-lefty matchups at 3,600. Other guys I like playing cheap on some other sites, like Alcides Escobar. I'm not paying almost $4,000 for a guy that just has no power. It's a good matchup for him against Colome, but he's just too expensive. I like Brad Miller in tournaments. He's got upside. And Alfredo Simon, 365 will allow the lefties. I think he's a good option there as well. But likely, if I'm going cheap here, guy I mentioned earlier, Cesar Hernandez, is probably the guy I'll go with.
Yeah, I don't mind Johnny Peralta against Lester. Lester looked better last time out. I think he threw 7 scoreless innings, but he hasn't been elite this year at all. Peralta's great against lefties.
Yeah. For
only 3,600, you're getting an ace-facing type discount for Peralta there. I don't think Lester's been anywhere near an ace.
No.
So I think he's an interesting play. The other cheap guy, like you mentioned Hernandez already, who I think is probably the top shortstop play today.
Yep.
I mentioned Arias at third base. He's shortstop eligible also. Same rule applies there, probably even more so with less options at shortstop. He's 2,000. Ruben Tejada, we mentioned that Heston keeps the ball on the ground a ton, but Tejada is not a guy that hits as many home runs, so I don't mind him at 2,300. I think that's pretty cheap, especially if he's sitting second in the order.
Definitely.
Heston's good and keeps the ball on the ground like we mentioned, but he's not an elite guy either. I think 2,300 is a steal for him. Outside of that, I like him more than Flores at 2,900, like we mentioned at second base. I think Tejada is cheaper, and you're not counting so much on the long ball. He's a little bit more of an average hitter. He can be a better cash game play for 2,300. I think that's basically everybody that I'm looking at
shortstop. All right, moving over here to outfield. Bryce Harper going to be your top option, the most expensive option as well. 5,700 against Anthony DeSclafani. He's been okay, but Bryce Harper, as you know, been an incredible hitter this season. So you got to love him here. Below him, Ryan Braun, kind of pricey for me. It's an okay matchup against a rookie, but not really a guy that I'm actively targeting here. But the guy that I really like for tournaments a lot is J.D. Martinez, $4,300. He's got home runs in 7 of his last 10 games, facing off against Sashi Iwakuma, who, as you know, struggles with the long ball. So I think if I'm paying that upper mid price, it's going to be for Martinez.
Yeah, I think so. My top play, probably price-wise, is Jock Peterson at 4,000 against O'Sullivan. I mean, he's just an absolute steal with the wind blowing out to right there. I mean, O'Sullivan's been giving up quite a few home runs. He's probably my favorite Dodgers lefty out of all the ones I've mentioned so far. I also like Ethier if he's in the lineup. I would think he would be against the righty. He's been playing quite a bit, especially if Gonzalez doesn't play again today with that wrist or hand injury or whatever he has. I mean, I'd have a hard time thinking that Ethier wasn't going to be in the lineup. I don't mind Puig either at 4,300. Basically, all these Dodgers are underpriced for some reason today against O'Sullivan. So I'm going to be looking pretty heavily at them. I think they'll be pretty heavily owned, though. I agree with you. Bryce Harper's probably the top play overall. It's awfully hard to argue with him at this point. If we're talking more middle of the pack type guys, um, there's not a ton of guys I like in this like really mid range spot. I think Martinez is probably the top one, like you mentioned. I don't mind Torrey Hunter against the lefty. He's been pretty solid against lefties this year. I believe he's got a 369 WOBA against them for his career, which, I mean, has been a super long time at this point. But, I mean, he's always been a guy that hits lefties pretty well. I don't mind Travis Snyder for Baltimore. If he's in the lineup at 3,400 against Hughes, I think he's a fine play also. Logan Morrison for Seattle is a guy that I don't mind against Simon either. He's been leading off for them against righties lately. He's only 3,500 as first base and outfield eligibility. There was one other guy I had in that mid range here that I liked a decent amount, but I'll skip him for now.
Gerardo Parra?
Yeah, that's the other one.
I figured it was 3,700 is a really good price.
Yeah,
for him
everyone's been playing him lately. He's been red hot over the last 2 or 3 games. Hot overall for the last 7 days or so. I think he's going to be heavily owned just because of the hot streak he's on. That was the other one that was definitely slipping my mind there. As far as cheap guys, by far my favorite cheap play in the outfield on DraftKings today is Justin Maxwell, 2,500 against a lefty.
Yep.
He's been hitting 6th in the order against lefties. We've seen him display some nice power at times this season. I think he's going to be in a ton of my lineups today.
Yeah, I love that. There's not a lot of really cheap guys like you mentioned, but you got to love him around that price. And then your BVP special today, if you're chasing one of those, Melky Cabrera 17 for 30 off of Mark Burley. So not a guy that I like to play, but I know some people believers in these things. Maybe throw him in a tournament or two. Not a guy I'll play in cash games or anything like that, but definitely a guy in that mid-range to consider for your GPPs.
Yeah, definitely. Kevin Kiermaier at 3,700 hitting first in the lineup against Volquez is probably a decent play. He's been pretty hot lately. He's been heating up a little bit. I think he went 2 for 4 in each of the last 2 games. Another relatively cheap guy that I like, Ryan Rayburn. He's sick right now, so he's questionable for the game, but at 2,600 against a lefty, he's always a really solid play. Hitting cleanup for the Indians most of the time against lefties. I had one other cheap guy that I really... Oh, Eddie Rosario for Minnesota. If he's hitting at the top of the order despite the lefty-lefty matchup, I think he's a fine play at 3,100. Not as good a play as a couple of these other guys that are a little bit lower priced, but I think he's a fine overall play, especially for GPPs with the way he's been playing.
Yeah, and I'll throw out one more mid-range guy, Alex Gordon, $3,900 against Alex Colome.
Yeah.
Colome, average pitcher, contact pitcher, and Gordon homered his last game. Still hasn't had a great season this year, but we know he's a much better hitter than what he's shown, so I really like him as well tonight. All right, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out Colossus, our optimizer, and a lot of great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.